Hi, everyone. It's Andrew with the Alliance for Innovation Infrastructure, and today I'm gladly joined by Sam Wiffen, CEO and founder of Reveal, to discuss infrastructure and damage prevention.
Reveal works to move the world from paint on the ground to the digital twin of the subsurface, all from utility mapping and utility information management to concrete scanning and asset management data collection. Reveal is one of New Zealand's most experienced underground utility locators and surveyors, utilizing world-class methods and technology. Sam, I am so pleased to be speaking with you today. It's a pleasure to learn and converse with somebody as ambitious as you when it comes to recognizing the infrastructure beneath our feet. To start off, I'm going to ask you a very basic question. How did your transition from engineer to entrepreneur start?
Honored to be here as well. Thanks heaps, Andrew. Lovely to spend the time with you. That journey was born out of frustration and a deep value set in, I suppose, doing the right thing. I grew up on farms. I think the DNA I've always had is a bit of an entrepreneur. I'm just hungry to learn. I've worked in a variety of different industries, and from law firms to productions to movies to you name it, trying to find, you don't know your favorite food till you've eaten it. And having worked in the infrastructure space, building utilities for my father's company that he used to work for, went and did engineering at university, figured out that I'm not very good at the technical stuff, but probably more of a project manager, more of a sharp talker and a communicator. Working on major infrastructure projects, I used to employ utility locators to mark out pre-construction. And I ran into a major variation on a project where we had a whole lot of contaminated land, and as a young project engineer and a project manager, I'd followed all the processes. So I had contamination testing done, we did investigations, surveying, and we still ran into it. And the client just sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, well, that's the way the world is. And I thought, that's not good enough. Looked overseas, saw ASCE 3802, saw the work that was being done in the UK, and then off the back of the Christchurch rebuild, so there's a massive earthquake in Christchurch in 2011. There was a huge amount of work happening there, plus a national rollout of the ultra-fast broadband infrastructure. And I like getting my hands dirty, so I got stuck in and learned how to use it and quickly figured out that geophysicists were probably a better place to do that. I don't know. I think just being an entrepreneur is that love of the mud and the blood and the, getting really true to the problem. It was just out of frustration and necessity to try and figure out this thing that hadn't been figured out before.
What would your pitch be for damage prevention?
Oh, that's good. I like that one. Pitch for damage prevention for me would be enlightenment. It sounds very ethereal, but if you think around the people that are out there day in, day out, they're the ones that die, they're the ones that get hurt. They're a canary in the mine somewhat. And I feel like a very poetic solution to that would be to enable the canaries to solve the problem. So many times construction crews are out there, they are the end of a long trail of decisions that have been made or consequences that are in place, and they're the unfortunate sort of recipients of the sort of the Swiss cheese approach to risk. But if we could flip the table and flip the opportunity where they are now in control of that destiny, that would be there. Now, they need another thing to do, like they need a hole on the head, right? If there's not enough pressure and sort of drive for them to be more efficient and not hit the utilities, there's a very sort of philosophical piece which I'd love to get into. But if we could create a value proposition that would enable them to solve the problem whilst delivering their own work, that would be the fundamental shift in the way that we do this. We can create policies and strategies, and we should. New technology is always coming online, but there's a lot of stuff in the way. If we're really going to create a massive shift, I think there's a huge opportunity to engage the people that are at the coalface to help be part of a really fundamentally transformational solution.
Oh, certainly. What kind of issues have you seen?
Yeah, let's start off with probably more practical, and then we can get to more theoretical. Incomplete, inaccurate, out-of-date records and information, non-standardized information, misrepresentation of the way that we use equipment to do that. A lot of the times we've had it in the past, say ground penetrating radar has been used. Now, you don't need a license to fly ground penetrating radar in most countries. Don't fly it, it's a euphemism. But humans would blame themselves if they're not there. It's not a utility locating tool, it's a geophysical instrument. So you need to have a good understanding of geophysics to drive these and gain the best insights, and also talk around the problems you have with them. There's a need for a lot of businesses to vertically integrate. They want to in-house as much as they can, which means they don't specialize where we need it in certain areas, standards and governance. But I think really getting down to it comes down to human behavior. We've had a transition from paper-based records to digital records, and there's ambiguity, and a lot of that drive was because we've seen the opportunities that technology has enabled us to provide in terms of efficiency and better quality, but through those sort of ambiguous phases, we've done a platform shift. It's kind of created a lot of poor records and record keeping. But if it's 3 o'clock on a Friday and it's really, really hard ground and it's sunny and you get to go home and have a beer, are you going to be burying that utility to death? There's a lot of out of sight, out of mind behavior, and humans, unfortunately, are like water. We follow the path of least resistance, and once it's buried, it's pretty tricky to dig it up and make sure it is where they said it was. And it's just a confluence of lots of different problems that lead towards the damage prevention industry being existent. There's no one silver bullet that will solve it all. It's a lot of things.
Yeah, it's definitely such an interesting domain, because when I came into the Alliance for Innovation Infrastructure, I didn't have any knowledge really about public policy, damage prevention in general. And I don't know how much Ben told you about me, but I used to be a fashion photographer, and then I was in the
Yeah.
military. And it was at the point where I said, okay, well, I'm very creative. Like, let me translate what you do and make it make sense to the general public. And this has been such a marvelous catalyst for me being able to learn how to educate people better. From an innovation and technology standpoint, I'd love for you to tell us more about utility mapping elements. I was looking into what you guys do, and one of the things that stood out was 3D utility. I thought that was really cool.
Love your journey. I think that's something that this industry needs. It's not sexy. it's not cool. It's not made palatable to a large audience, and therefore, does it get enough exposure? Does it get enough sort of really understanding? I think around the quote, no one cares about the bomb that didn't go off. We're working silently at the night to solve a lot of these issues, and really it's pragmatism that kind of gets in the way. So how do you increase the knowledge to push to decisions that are being made further down there? And it comes down to marketing, really, because if humans are the part of the challenge, like how do we enable better human behavior, or become more evocative so people become passionate, make decisions like this doing. So I love your journey, and there's actually quite a lot of people in Reveal that have come from a diverse range of backgrounds, and some of our developers that have come in, or lots of people come in, they go, man, I didn't know this was an issue. I didn't even think about it. I don't see it. It's not there. But I hate it when people go and dig up the road again. And I hate it when someone cuts the fiber to the house. So there's a very sort of real experience that people have, but probably unaware of just the state of what this information is.
I think the big thing that when you say the phrase real experiences, that's something that, we don't want it to be something that actually comes to fruition. And one really funny comparison that I've actually made to damage prevention with friends who are trying to understand the concept of what it means to, pursue damage prevention is with Titanic. They cared so much about the aesthetics, and they didn't implement, better safety measures. And because of this, there was, immense tragedy. And that's the same thing that we're trying to do. These are the lifeboats, and the ways that, on the surface, it may not have looked as nice with a bunch of lifeboats, correct? But at the same time, we are trying to mitigate that, surface level appearance when it comes to the spray paint markings, the old school ways of doing things, and trying to find the new modern version of that.
No, that's awesome, and that leads quite well into your question around the 3D space. I'm deeply passionate about the people in the coalface because it's where I've come from, but also from a product perspective and a marketing perspective, and how we change behavior as a human perspective. I sit down with contractors and I give them 2D plans, drawings, big stack of them, or I show a fully 3D model of the underground of a city, and I say, which one do you trust more? And they go, paper drawings. because it's what they've been looking at for 100 years. We don't have that level of trust. We don't have, like, how do they use that? You can, and there's some really progressive mixed reality or augmented reality solutions that would start to say, well, how do you start to bring that information to make better decisions in the hands? It's not there yet. We don't have the positioning is probably the biggest challenge, and also the data itself. But really, if you go to a contractor and you say, hey, look, they've been sitting there with a big excavator, and you give them a 3D model, and he goes, just put paint on the ground, man. I just want to see paint on the ground. I just want to, I need to make that real. And that's how we address that today. Like, we can't escape it. There's different scenarios that they can work, and we're testing and innovating. But today, it's paint on the ground that's going to solve that problem. 100% in the future, we'll be able to do that. So whilst we are huge champions for the 3D and the digital, I'm grounded in reality that we have to make sure we've got a really pivotal role to play here, because we could oversell 3D and turn a market against it. We must make sure that people trust on the way through. So 3D is really important, because adding that third dimension unlocks a whole lot more decisions that can be made off it. Now, you may always, well, a lot of different sectors or customers or stakeholders will look at the information in 2D, but having that 3D information there unlocks so much more. Yep, we can make big, sexy 3D models of the underground, but really how it's used and what it's used for are the important pieces.
Well, moving off of that, do you think that your model could pull the damage prevention industry forward, making it more proactive and less reactive?
100%. I'm probably not very good at business, because I suppose one of the things as a utility surveying company, we get asked to map the same things over and over again. And you could go, oh, that's cool, we'll just go and do that. But that wouldn't enable my staff to grow and give them career opportunities, because they don't want to go and open the same manhole at 3 o'clock in the morning again. So there's all these fragmented approaches. So if you could unlock where we could map it once and you could see that information, that's a huge opportunity. Insights that someone else could get on a site 6 months later, if another contractor's on site, they can see those insights. Then the lessons that have been learned before can be learned by other people. What is missing is a business model or a commercial model that looks towards that. For sure, when we're on, say, private sites like major airports or ports or substations, defense facilities, you can do that. You can capture all that information, and then you can make sure through policies and standards, through work procedures, that you can incrementally keep that information up to date. But if you look at, say, an airport as a mini city, all they are these discrete different capital or operational projects that are occurring, but all the information is coming to a central repository to learn, and we're learning in 3D. So that down the track, for sure, people are going to be wearing their AR glasses, and you'll be able to see what risk looks like. You'll be able to see the three-dimensional tolerance of error associated to utilities. Or a whole lot of different unlocks will occur, but it cannot occur unless we start to sort of make decisions now and work towards that future.
Do you think that it's really important to find a balance between traditional ways of doing things, with the kind of people who want to see something physically in front of them, and with the way that digital technology is evolving?
Absolutely. There's the whole horse to water analogy, right? I don't think brute forcing people into a new technology and saying, well, this is the way you have to do it, comes with the greatest impact. I feel like if we hold people's hand and take them along the journey and say, here's a media that you've been, or a medium that you've been familiar with, here's the next iteration of that. And the next iteration, we can slowly start to build that trust and familiarity. Then I'd say that it's fundamentally, we have to look at that. And there's a lot of businesses out there, entities in the states or governing bodies that have different levels of technology maturity. And we can't sort of expect that people would have a high level of technology maturity. If we can accommodate for a lot of different cases, then it's far more palatable for a business to probably take, what's the next little step that I can do, as opposed to saying, well, everyone needs to migrate to this fully functioning 3D thing. That's setting the bar too high, and we all know that you set the bar high, no one's going to go over it. If you lower the bar, it's not likely that people will get over the bar.
With everything that is moving and evolving, like I just mentioned, what does the education look like for the people who are, the direct result of decisions being made behind the scenes when these people are also trying to learn how the technology's changing and um, what would your answer to that
Yeah,
be?
that's a huge factor we need to consider. It's the education, it's the marketing piece. What I think doesn't happen enough on projects with respect to the delays or failures, things that went wrong, is full-on autopsies. What really went wrong? What could have happened? What happens is these projects are big and they're capital funded, and then we end up brute forcing, I suppose, the margin onto the next project, and we go, well, we'll wash that up later on. And if we really started to understand what was the root cause of a lot of this, there's a lot of different papers that are being undertaken from universities and other bodies, starting to understand, hey, by not having accurate information in the underground, what is the actual cost? What's the direct cost? What's the indirect cost? And if we look at this really tricky thing with respect to the consequence and likelihood, you might have a very, very, very low likelihood, but an extremely high consequence. Quite tricky when we talk around like the bomb that didn't go off. So some of these decisions are quite tricky, and this is where it's got us into globally from an infrastructure perspective. We've had decisions being made. Do I spend an extra couple of $1 million on maintaining that piece of infrastructure, even though I've had no responses back that it's failing? There's not the pragmatic approach is going, well, I'll deal with what's actually real. Investing in that asset to the extent its life is quite a tricky thing that we've had to grapple with, and we're in this position that we're in. So when you start to look at it and you go, actually, if we invested a lot of money up front, which we haven't done before on a major infrastructure project, to ensure that we don't have a 20, 30%, or sometimes even 100 or 200 or 300% cost overrun, without that information, how do people start to sort of mandate that or even suggest it, that that's a possibility on these major infrastructure projects? It's not to take away from work that's happening on projects. It's becoming more efficient. Yeah, we've only got a finite amount of resources that we can throw at an enormous amount of work that we have to do. But the business case established for better information on projects up front and how that reaps rewards and increases productivity is the major education piece that I think we need.
One of the things that stood out that you just said was evaluating the autopsies of what went wrong. I really love that. It's really diving into the complexities of what could have caused, the issue, and then also discovering what helps drive efficiency.
Yeah.
So my next question is, how has this old school industry, this communal responsibility for safety transcend through other cultures?
It's been interesting, my experience across the construction and infrastructure utility sector. Some, I suppose it comes back to the point, some handle it better than others. So I used to work in the heavy electrical space, and there was a very real sort of denominator of, if you operate in a substation, if you mess up, you die. So fear was a great motivator to follow that, and that bred quite a good safety culture in my experience of being quite transparent and open and learning and saying, hey, look, we made this there was a near miss and we learned from this, and next time we're going to change that. In the industry welcomed that and supported that. But then flicking across into more of a civil space, when we applied the same approach, especially when we're saying, oh, look, we probably could have done this but a bit better, we became a really easy witch to burn, because in that sort of finger pointing exercise, they're like, they did it, those guys messed up. So I think in terms of other industries, I'm not too sure, but I think when it comes down to when the stakes are so high, we have, say, for example, the pragmatism approach of like someone will die. That probably drives a lot of behavior of going, actually, we can't get into this whole finger pointing blame exercise piece. Let's actually see if we can learn and drive this. Arguably, it's there, right? Arguably, we have people dying from hitting infrastructure all the time, but the gravity of that, I think, hasn't either landed as much as it should, probably because there's so many different moving parts to it all. I'm constantly searching for parallels, right? Like, what other industries have addressed this? You could say banking, for example. Banking has a nice parallel when it comes to trust, because you can lose trust quite quickly. So how do you build that back? And when it comes to the underground, you need to build that trust off the back of it as well. The other one is, I think, around toothbrushes. At some point, people didn't brush their teeth, and why did we start brushing our teeth? It wasn't because we had a real experience of our teeth falling out from decay. It's because we were probably marketed to, in a very, very evocative way, that we started brushing our teeth, because we were sold a future that we were going, well, I want that. I don't want my teeth to fall out. So I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to spend this money. I'm going to invest in the future of my teeth to do that. So I'm probably not the answer you were looking for, but the only parallel I can kind of think of that lands quite well is the dental hygiene industry.
No, I love it. I think any kinds of comparisons like that are really important, especially getting people more interested into infrastructure issues. But even thinking about Halloween's coming up, and I'm thinking, how can I get people interested in thinking about energy infrastructure? And I was like, oh, well, Monsters Inc. ran off of Scream Energy, and Final Destination had this massive, bridge collapse in one of their movies. Like, maybe I can do some commentary on that and get people thinking about, why are these things being embedded into our, pop culture, with underlying importances of, like, what are the what ifs, what really is helping sustain this lifestyle that we have, and when it goes wrong, how detrimental can it be? I mean, we're seeing permanent consequences for disregarding what is beneath the surface.
I love that. We could definitely riff off this a lot more, especially having a bit of a design background as well. But when you think around the old sort of pirate maps, and in the corner of the map was the little snaky dragon, and it was like, there be dragons. If you think around the concept of that, the motif of saying there is danger here, informing the reader that there is danger there, don't go there. It's an interesting sort of parallel. It's kind of like sharks. There's lots of different things, like the Minotaur and the labyrinth and the underground. Like, there's a lot of that out of sight, out of mind approach. But then how do you start to think around these sort of higher motifs that communicate this in a better way? We're definitely rich with that in the underground. I agree with you. We probably haven't latched onto something as well as we should have. I like the Scream Energy approach, though. That was a cool movie.
Actually, just bouncing off of this, what would you like the average person to know about these issues, and what would you like U.S. policymakers to know?
I think if people fully understood the state of not just the US, but the global state of subsurface information infrastructure, and what actual problems are born from that, I think people would be shocked to understand the gravity of that. In terms of policy and how we look at this, I think we've got an enormous amount of headwinds, that are sort of blowing and will only get stronger in terms of mass urbanization, trying to get people into cities. We've got failing infrastructure, we've got climate change, we've got just a technology shift that's unparalleled. We've got all these different opportunities. This is an absolute low-hanging bit of fruit that we can start to really see some immediate things. The problem is because it's so fragmented, it's kind of like, oh, if I did this thing, I'll get this return. It could be an enormous return. We just need to make sure that we've got that popularized, but it kind of links towards the first piece. If we fully understood what the drag is, what the problems are, and what they stem from, and what some of the opportunities to unlock would be, I think it would be phenomenal. One of the other ones that sort of sprung to mind is an idea that I've sort of had for a bit, is just wider education. I'd love for people to understand, hey, that water main, where did that water come from? Hey, that sewer main, where does that go? And if you can educate the public towards that, it will create better decisions, I think. Even, a small portion of that, when people are more informed, they'll make good decisions going, oh, maybe I shouldn't drop or tip my paint down that sum because it's going to end up in there. If that was more real and it stops those micro sort of actions, then I think it's a hugely beneficial piece.
How do you think social media has impacted the way that people view critical issues? And just what people putting their time into. I feel like intentionality is very important, what people are spending their valuable time in doing. Why do you think other things are being focused on rather than something like this?
Yeah. I think it still comes down to that very sort of real notion of out of sight, out of mind, because I can't see it, it's not real. Like you said, we walk around and it's just a state of being. We assume that we're going to get, especially in developed nations, that we're going to get clean water. But even in developed nations, we're not getting clean and reliable water out of our taps. So it probably speaks to your question. What would it take for people to do that? And I think the pragmatism of, oh, it's very real. We got sick from drinking the water that I've taken for granted out of my tap because of these systemic reasons. I mean, we've had a bit of a dress rehearsal when it's come to the pandemic and climate change of human behavior around these systemic issues, and regardless of opinions. It's very, very interesting to watch humans' behavior off the back of that. Can't also weigh into the algorithm and what social media is kind of placed in front of the individual, but it could perform an interesting role in the way that we make those subliminal sort of decisions, be they good or bad. I remember early when TikTok came out, I jumped on TikTok because I love learning about new platforms and things. And I thought, oh, I'll just have a look at all the infrastructure and utility stuff on here. And there wasn't a lot. And I was like, oh, boo, I'm out. But then I haven't really jumped back in there because it was so early. There wasn't enough content creators in there for me to consume that content. And I'm hungry to find that information because I'm a nerd when it comes to this space and what's there. But
I love it.
I think this is an interesting reflection I've never had before. The journey of Reveal to move out of a competitive space from other utility surveying firms to hope we want to get to a position where we're giving away all of our IP. We're giving away what we've learned because we want people to do the right thing. And we're playing a role in this, and then we can help other people become better. It's because I've been inspired what other people are doing around the world, other utility surveying companies. It's been immensely rewarding to meet the largest utility surveying companies from around the world in a very disarming and sort of communal way of people that have the same values, that are doing it for the right reasons. They have the same backgrounds, they have the same frustrations. Those connections are made sometimes through social media, and I think that's a cool piece for the sector when it comes to understanding the problem. I mean, you look at things like the World Economic Forum has phenomenal social media feeds around big systemic issues, and I think those and news feeds are ones that really would articulate to people the gravity of some of these issues.
There's many reasons why I brought up this question. I've been learning more and more about how social media has affected younger generations. I'm doing a master's program at Boston College right now, and we're learning about production and consumption environments when it comes to social media and how most of what we probably have on our phones are consumption. It's like what you said with TikTok, you didn't really want to be on it because it's not enough for you to consume at the time. And I'm thinking more and more about this and why we should probably be gearing ourselves toward, applications, digital media that is more production oriented so that our brains are thinking, we're thinking critically, we're thinking more about these kinds of things. When it comes to innovation and technology, what do you think? This is just a fun question, a what if, but where do you think go in the future to have people be more hands-on with the utilities in their yard and where they are, and even just the ways that you can submit a ticket with 811 over the phone? Like, how do you think that could improve looking forward?
I mean, I could talk about this for hours. The mind goes to a million places. One of the things, I'll start high and then I'll go to real. We can communicate so much more through a visual medium than we can through oral or sort of written word. So when you start to think around the power of, say, mixed reality or augmented reality, you can, through, say, like first design principles, red bad, green good, you can change behavior of people, or like, I don't mean that in a nefarious sense, I mean that in a positive way, that if you had on some mixed reality, you could see risk, but not sort of click on it and understand that that is a risk through first design principles and the way that humans consume things through their eyes, that say, oh, that's a risk, I'm not going to go there. Like, why, poisonous frogs are red, and whatever. I don't know why strawberries are red. Someone will tell me. So when you start to think around that opportunity, and then tie in something like gamification, and I don't mean gamification in the sense of like Pokemon Go. Whilst I wrote a paper once around what's infrastructure, or Pokemon Go for infrastructure look like. I could nerd out about that, but more like your air points that you get, that real sort of like subtle, oh, I'm part of a community, I want to go, I'm going to change my micro behavior to create this outcome, and that impacts something in a positive way. So it might impact my community, or it might impact my air points for this, and changing those behaviors. So two sides is around changing the behavior based on a really interesting visual format, but then also changing the behavior based on like a commercial or social construct of motivation. Like you've heard around micropayments, which are going to be a huge part of the future. Micropayments or transactions that happen for different micro decisions that you make that may not mean much to you, but if you look at like everyone walking around outside has a different wants and needs that are at different heights, but you can't tell. Technology would then sort of democratize that somewhat, and I'm sure will probably be used definitely for nefarious reasons in the future, but provides a massive opportunity for us to go, oh, well, why would I take the picture of this hole that's taken us 6 hours to open up and share that? There's no motivating factor. There's probably even like more liability associated with that. But if you can unlock that and figure that out, then that is a huge shift around someone else consuming that in different ways. So I get really excited around that. I think a lot of the time technology is the tail wagging the dog. Like people get really excited around mixed reality, and it definitely is part of my narrative for the future. But we've got to think about, the fundamentals. Got to make sure the data's right. Got to make sure that we can trust it, and do a whole lot of other good things. Otherwise, it'll fail before it even gets off the ground. I've been reading a lot about pragmatism because I'm trying to understand the human element to this, trying to understand the human behavior, because we are the only solution to damage prevention and or climate change. But and could you shift it by creating a motivating factor from a business to consumer type transaction where there's value to someone, but that actually pushes you in the right direction? Like, that's awesome. Win-win. Like, let's create those instead of going, oh, I have to do this because my boss told me to do this, and I don't want to do it. You're doing it for the wrong reasons. But if you could actually create that win-win scenario, that's when we really get that sort of traction. And I don't know whether it's where this comes from, back to the entrepreneurial thing, because one of the things that I like as a leader in this space, I want to try and speak this message as loud and as hard as I can and help people. There's no finger pointing. Everyone's in the same ship, right? And like feel like we've got that. Like there's been sort of nasty things, sort of like I've had experiences in my life where like the things you'd never think would happen have actually happened. So because that's quite real, my sort of pragmatism spectrum is probably a lot longer than others. And I feel like that's a gift to give to people, to say like, look, you may think this might not happen, but it does happen, and it could happen to you. And if you can kind of increase someone's sort of radar or spectrum a little bit, then that's a win, right?
I agree. That's perfectly said. I love that. What might the policy framework look like moving forward?
There's been great steps towards this already. So, for example, in California, there's ordinance around digitally capturing everything that goes in the ground. The more and more we understand the underground, the more we'll be able to do. And that's in the very fundamental sense. Starting with that first step is huge. Practical things, and I know, say, for example, Indiana has looked at this from an asset management perspective, is understand what you've got. Like the first thing, whenever I've consulted major utilities or ports or airports, stop the leak in the ship. The first thing we need to do is fix our as-builts. Let's make sure that new as-builts that come in are good. Let's stop compounding that, because we're going to try and do something like I think you mentioned the analogy before, with the Titanic, right? You could solve all these kind of key things, but unless you sort of get like drilling holes in the ship, is actually quite a tight analogy. There's no point in moving forward unless we sort of stop those leaks in the ship. I think 2 calls to action, very, very clear, is capture everything in the underground as it goes in a digital way. That's huge. And then start to understand what we've got. There's always going to be risks with anything from a cyber perspective, but I mean, this is a probably unpopular opinion. If you look at privacy for individuals, we cared, but our behavior belied our care, right? I don't want all my information going to Facebook. Too bad. Like, they've got it. Like, the horse is bolted. It's done. So what's the impact to that? Now, we can look at it from a utilities perspective. IoT represents a massive opportunity when it comes to, say, push-pull. If you can you influence the infrastructure by hacking into, say, a water network and shutting off valves in a nefarious way? There is that possibility. When we start to look at the damage prevention operation, we need to kind of push aside in the performance of the assets. When you think around, if we had millimeter accurate model of everything underground, that's a big step towards damage prevention, sort of like utopia. Now, cybersecurity of understanding millimeter accurate or sub-inch accurate models of everything underground, what could that be used for? Now, I'd love to talk to people about this, because I feel like this is a very evocative topic that is misconstrued but is not explored very well. Call out to PhD students. I'll help, do a bit of a research piece on this, because I don't think the risk is as real from an accurate network perspective as what we think it is. If you did the maths, which we talked around before, by not knowing where those bits of infrastructure are, we're probably doing far more damage than we ever could from a nefarious sense. If also from a resilience perspective, if a city understood where all their critical infrastructure was, they could help make planning decisions, which they do already, and saying, well, I don't want to have a confluence of high criticality, high risk assets in close proximity. I want to make sure I diversify that risk. So then how do we start to have those sorts of conversations? I think we as an industry, and shoulder on ourselves of more stuff that we've got to do, is articulate and publicize this topic a lot more, because I don't feel like the risk is as big as what we think it is. Yes, bad actors playing with interfering with infrastructure is an issue, and that's being addressed. But I think from a damage prevention perspective, if we come down to accurate location of utilities, you can see half the nodes above ground anyway, so what's the real risk of the below ground? I think we need to have this conversation more and provide some more information to look at that. Not saying the risk isn't there, but I don't feel like it's as big as what we think it is. But we need to prove that. We need to have some information to make sure that we can talk about that a bit more.
Thank you so much for joining the conversation, Sam. We really appreciate you being here today.
Thanks so much. Look, honored to be here, and huge supporter for what you guys are doing. It's amazing. It's much needed. I was incredibly excited to find what you're doing, and if I can help in any way, if I can get behind it all, it's huge. So well done on all your effort. It's phenomenal work.
Thank you. Very honored for you to say that.